Welcome back, everybody. My guests today are William Humphrey, the pharmacy director at St. Jude's Children's Hospital, and Alex Rodriguez, the compliance program manager at St. Jude. If you missed my previous interview with them, please go check it out. Go listen to it. It was all about their cameras in the OR. Yes, the OR. When we spoke about the cameras throughout your facility, I know that there was definitely an approval process, and I'm going to guess that there's some sort of diversion prevention committee that may have played a role in making that happen. So let's talk about that committee, and I think it's good for the rest of the community to see what types of committees we have, who's on them, their role, their value, and that type of stuff, so that we can share that information with each other. So let's talk about your committee, William. How did it get started? Who's on it? Give us some background on it.
Okay. Prior to 2016, anytime we had an event, typically I was notified, and then you know the process. You scurry around trying to gather the people that you needed, to get involved. That typically involved nursing, occasionally anesthesia, and then eventually human resources. And so around 2016, we decided that we needed a diversion. We called it a diversion task force. And so we came up with the people that we needed to be on that. And of course, that included us, the pharmacy, nursing, anesthesia, compliance, human resources, and security, and then someone from administration. And then eventually we added security and legal and I think that covers everybody we initially had on there. And then we started looking at practices and policies and so forth, and we realized that we needed to do a gap analysis. And so we reached out and we hired a consultant to come in and help us do that. And so they spent several days here with, again, primarily pharmacy, nursing, and anesthesia, kind of looking at all of our processes and our policies and procedures, and then eventually came back with a list of recommendations. And that initial list was a little overwhelming. We thought we had a good program in place, but it was around 130 recommendations. And I was floored.
Wow.
And, but we were told, that's actually less than average.
Okay.
And
so you did have a good program.
A lot of those were minor fixes.
Sure.
And stuff that we could implement. So we looked at those recommendations and then came up with a plan, how we were going to tackle those and get those done. There were a handful that weren't really relevant, and so we could eliminate those. But then the others, we came up with a plan to implement those. And so we began working on that, and it took a few years, to kind of get through that whole list and get everything, kind of up to date, so to speak. And then one of the recommendations too was, we couldn't have 20 people responding to, an event that happened. So we needed to kind of have a small kind of a immediate response team, to look at those events when they happen, and try to include the people that were most likely involved. And again, that always included me, and then it included someone from compliance, and then typically nursing, and occasionally anesthesia, human resources. We've rarely had to include security, but they would be part of it as well. And so that made the team, that immediate response team smaller, so that we could, get things done quickly. Because, DEA regulations, if you discover diversion, you've got 24 hours to report it, and we wanted to, be able to act quickly.
When you talk about the immediate response team getting involved, are you talking specifically about doing the investigation work that needs to be done to come to a conclusion? And do you have that small group only, or do you have the bigger group that actually makes Like, how are final decisions made?
Yeah, that small group would do the investigation and then present the findings to the larger group. And then it was typically the larger group that would make the recommendation of what, if it required any kind of disciplinary action, especially, what we needed to do from there.
Right.
And
Yeah, and I think
that
go
took some fine tuning. We had some members that were a little overzealous at times, and so we had to kind of dial back. But I think that's kind of settled itself now.
Yeah, and different members on the team also help to kind of push back, like, well, wait a minute, and ask some questions. And there's so much value, I think, in the committees. I just, from my own experience, I have worked at places that haven't had them. And so what ends up happening is the diversion specialist, which in one case was myself, there's a lot of that rests on your shoulder. I mean, it's not just you specifically. Obviously, it's in conjunction with I'll pick on the nurses, the nurse manager, and HR. But if you have a biased nurse manager and if you have an HR person that doesn't have a lot of experience with it, then they really look to the diversion specialist. And so that was a little burdensome, if I felt I had to push because, wait a minute, I think there's something here, and the nurse manager was pushing back, and then HR was just like, okay, well, tell me what I need to do. But I am just one person to try to push and make this decision, right? It's like, take it out of the hands of one or two people and give it to the committee. And then not only do you kind of share that burden and that decision, but it's interesting the different kinds of perspectives and the questions that are asked. And then different people will say, well, have you looked at? It's like, oh, no, we haven't looked at that yet. Okay, let's go back and look at it. And then over time, as they become more fluid, they're more experienced, then I wouldn't say it gets easier, but they know what to ask and we know what we're looking for. And then each time we do a little bit more before we come to the committee, right, with what our information is.
Right.
Yeah. And then I think too, from a legal perspective, would you agree, HR legal perspective, you're showing consistency as well?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and we've got an established process now that we go through step by step. One of the other recommendations, was to, instead of, and I know a lot of places do this successfully, but instead of having me having oversight of all of that, we push that to compliance, and that has really helped us.
Okay.
Dr. Humphrey talks about starting this in 2016. My predecessor, Felicia Warner, I came into this position around 2020, and a lot of that work had been put in place in the response team, the committee. So and a lot of work on that gap analysis that they had done. So all these tools were already set up for me, which helped me with buy-in when it came time to changing institutional policies, departmental policies, things that really drive the workflows that help prevent diversion from occurring and making sure we're compliant with all regulations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, all good stuff, all good points. We've talked about some of the benefits of having a committee in place, the consistency, the established process. Can you think of other benefits that have come out of it?
Points of views. You never look at a situation from we've actually even expanded. There's expanded. Sometimes we have research administration in there. As you know, us being a research hospital, that comes with its own medications that go through that different workflow. We've also expanded over time to subsections of say nursing. You know, it might not just be outpatient, just inpatient. We have all different areas of nursing involved and providing us input that just because we change something in the inpatient area, that might not be the best for the outpatient workflow. And so we collaborate on different points of views to kind of improve our workflows for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anybody from employee health or employee assistance on the committee?
We have the director of employee relations. I think that's what Kathleen's title is, but she knows all the human resource regulations and hiring and disciplinary action and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about from a employee assistance perspective? If there is somebody that's going to be, you know, reported and or termed?
She represents that group as well.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. Can you, maybe you can't share, I don't want to overstep in what you can and cannot share, what your policies are surrounding drug testing at your institution?
Yeah, it's pre-employment and then 4 calls.
4 calls.
We don't do any
Okay.
random.
Okay. Do they, I'm curious, do they consider, if you've got the data and you have reason to suspect, do they consider that for cause, or do they have to be exhibiting? Oh, they do.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's great. Most places I'm familiar with, for cause means somebody is exhibiting actual behavior at that moment. I think it's for cause if I have some data and there's a concern, but they don't define it that way. Okay. So they do. Do you know what kind of testing? Is it urine? Is it hair? Is it?
I believe it's urine.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Or
Just the urine. Yeah.
They do some saliva testing too.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I put you on the spot there with.
I think there's also breathalyzer is also one of those different tests, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Okay. All right. Do you?
If the employee refuses the drug screen, they're terminated.
Okay. All right. Do you usually ask everyone that you suspect to do it? Like, how do you define when to take them to testing?
That's where I think we rely on the committee. We bring the facts to the committee, and then those decisions are made.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Although if we catch somebody in the act, it's usually straight to human resources, and the employee relations person meets with the person and requests them to do a drug screen, and if they refuse, they're terminated.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's an important point, is we can have all of these processes set up, but there's different scenarios, right, that would cause you to deviate from the process and go more to an immediate action that has to be really, really quick and might be in a slightly different order.
Like Alex mentioned earlier in our session that we had someone taking empty vials out of a sharps container, and they were caught in the act, and they were asked to do a drug screen then, and they refused.
Okay. Okay. So it's terminated, reporting, and then that's that. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right. Do you have any words of wisdom on how a diversion prevention specialist can convince their facility to establish a committee like this if they don't already have one? I had mentioned that, I'd been in places where they didn't. I know one roadblock at one place that I was at is HR had a real problem with those in the committee hearing about staff that did not belong to them, that they didn't have a supervisory role. So they just didn't think it was appropriate to be sharing that kind of information with a, say, nurse director that didn't oversee them. So that was one roadblock that I had. So do you have any words of wisdom for other facilities if they want to establish one?
We never really encountered that. There was some concern initially about, if in particular anesthesiologists being physicians, there was some concern about having access to that information, but we resolved that. I think the importance behind having the diversion committee is, prior to having it, I had a few instances where, and it wasn't any fault of the department, but nursing sometimes would be in a hurry to try to get to the bottom of it and resolve it, and they would start that process without involving the pharmacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this has eliminated that. So now they know to contact me and typically Alex as well, when something doesn't look right, so the investigation can begin.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if a facility looks at the risk of not having something like this in place, it's almost more damaging when something occurs to not be able to have all this already set up, and the buy-in to make the changes to put full hospital-wide drug diversion prevention program in place. If you don't have all the different pieces there at the table talking, I mean, look at the example Dr. Humphrey gave, the waste. You have to bring EVS in to kind of talk to them about what happens during that process. That's not something you might have a discussion about without more different people from different backgrounds talking
Mm-hmm.
and making decisions.
Yeah, a different perspective. Yeah, and it is interesting because the people that are not clinical, they'll ask a question and often it's preceded by, okay, this might be a dumb question, but it's where their perspective is, and they sometimes ask the obvious, but the answer is not always obvious, right? It's kind of like, oh,
Completely.
yeah, we didn't think about that. That's an interesting way to look. We're just so deep in it from that clinical perspective that sometimes we miss it. I want to go back to something that you mentioned, William, with the anesthesia and how those are handled. So does your committee review cases involving anesthesia? Does it go to their peer group and then just summarize? Where is that line with your task force and anesthesia?
Yeah, anesthesia was one of the first groups we started with, looking at improving the processes. And so, especially with fentanyl, every single case, and we're small. I mean, compared to a lot of places, but we every single case was reviewed to make sure that the amount administered was correct, the amount wasted was correct, and then follow up with the MD anesthesiologists or the CRNAs if there was something missing. That tightened up that whole process significantly, so that now it's they rarely so to speak make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So there was complete buy-in by that group, and Alex, you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, and then we also learned a bunch of gaps in the technology they were using and some of the workflows. Over time, we've done a lot to improve how they work with the EHR or the medication cabinets or any other barriers that were preventing everything that needed to occur in those workflows.
That's great too, because then you get more buy-in from them if you can
Right.
collaborate and save them time, and it makes them happy. Yeah, we got to keep them happy. Okay, great. All right, this is some good stuff. Any closing comments or remarks that either one of you have on this? No? All right.
I
Go.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, I just feel lucky to have walked in and that had been set up. So
Yeah.
I'm really thankful that that St. Jude, you know, did the work they needed to have that in place.
Yes. Well,
Alex, Alex is modest. He is what he's done with our ability to analyze data and create dashboards. I mean, it's tremendous.
Thank you.
that's great. I know I've heard about some of your stuff, Alex, on a few calls, and yeah, it's mind-boggling to me, the person that doesn't have that technical mind to put any of that stuff in place. But yeah, you guys sound like you have an absolutely solid program, all the way from, you know, the data processes to your committees and that workflow and your cameras that you have. And good, you're keeping those kids safe
Thank you.
there. So
It still worries me, you know, because they say if you don't have diversion, you're not looking hard enough.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that's true. I think that's true, but I also think that the more systems you have in place and the longer you have had them in place, I think you're going to see less. I mean, it's just, you know, there was an independent hospital that I did some work for, and the first year, I mean, so many people were found. And after that, it became, you know, one a month, which was way less, and then one, maybe two a quarter. So yeah, were we missing some? Maybe, but could we find a reason for why it decreased? Absolutely. Nobody was looking versus, you know, now we're looking and word gets out. So yeah, I applaud you though for being, you know, vigilant, because there's some out there, but I truly feel that with everything that you're doing, that I would think it would be, you know, don't go to St. Jude if you want to divert, because they have all these things in place, right? It's going to be a lot harder. You have to be a lot more creative, which, you know, they are when they're desperate, but no, you got a lot of good stuff going. All right. Well, thank you both very much. This was interesting and it was a good discussion.
Thank you
thanks,
for
Jude.
having us.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.